Hello everyone, welcome to part one of a two-part series of following instrument flight rules in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. Now I want to start off by saying we're going to try to keep things relatively simple. There are going to be some simplifications for the reason that we're working in a flight simulator and not on a real aircraft, so kind of keep that in the back of your mind. But I just want to provide everybody with kind of like a basic little kind of foundation. I can go into way more detail when it comes to IFR flying, but for now I'm going to try to give you something that you can work with. First things first, before I get into the flight simulator and start fitzing around with some of the different options, I like to actually plan out an instrument flight. There's a lot of things going on with IFR flying that we have to be considering. We have to consider, can we fly high enough to avoid obstacles? We need to consider, can we get good radio coverage, air traffic control coverage? Is our aircraft capable of certain climbing maneuvers? There's a lot to it. So like I said, we're going to try to do something super basic. So let's go to it. First things first, we want to go ahead and select our departure. Again, this is the website, SkyVector. It's actually pretty slick. I'm going to type in KFOC. This is Francis Kabreski. This is on Long Island in the state of New York. And we're going to take a flight up to Groton, New London, which is Kilo Golf Oscar November. Now, if you're taking a normal VFR flight, you just basically follow this line. We have a little bit of airspace things we need to worry about here, but in general, you just straight line this right across the sound and you'd be good to go. But since we want to fly IFR route, we need to come up with a way to get there using just instruments. So what I like to do now is I'm actually going to flip us over from World VFR mode to World Low mode. What this does is it allows us to see all the Victor airways as well as the turboprop airways and the jetways and the Qways and everything like that we can use, that we can safely navigate using IFR. Again, IFR is just instrument flight rules. We're navigating via instruments as opposed to via visual references, which would be visual flight rules or VFR. So in this case, just taking a look real quickly, we notice that there's no highway that takes us directly. Again, highway, I'm being a little facetious here. Victor Airway, if you want to be more specific, that takes us directly from where we're taking off from all the way to where we're landing. Really sharp-eyed people will immediately notice the fact Groton, New London has its own VOR station actually built right into it, which means we could actually take off, lock onto that, and literally bring us all the way there if we wanted. But we're not going to do that for the purposes of this demonstration. What we're going to do instead is we're going to find the nearest jetway that we can take that will get us to Groton, New London. In this case, the closest one to us is the Victor 46 jetway. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab my little line here, and I'm just going to go ahead and poke it right there, and I'm going to use my plan option to go ahead and put a waypoint there. Again, this is a hypothetical point. We're going to join this jetway and then fly over here to Hampton VOR TAC. Yes, this is a VOR TAC. That just means it also has a TACAN station at it. So what we're going to do is after we approach this, we're then going to follow this radio directly along the Victor 46 airway to East Hampton VOR. So I'm actually going to click that right there, and now we're in great shape. You can see we'll take off, go here, get on the Victor 46, fly to East Hampton, and then we can go directly to Groton, New London. Now you're probably noticing there's another airway that takes us right there. That's Victor 308 airway. This is awesome, and not only is it awesome, but it has a waypoint on it that we can actually use to help find where we are in the air. In this case, if you look over to our right, how do we figure out where this waypoint is in the air? Well, the reality is we could use a DME, which is distance measuring equipment, or we could actually take this cross radial, basically a cross bearing from Block Island State. We're not going to do this either in flight or in this video, just on account of the fact it's a lot of switching of knobs and frequencies to get that perfect. And every time you touch that knob, you're running the risk of making an error. So you want to simplify your flight plans. So maybe Boros isn't going to be the best way to get to our destination. By the way, one thing we always want to be thinking about is the wind direction. For our example, we're going to assume the wind is coming out of this general direction, this kind of northeast or something along those lines. So we'll take off, we'll intercept Victor 46, go to Hampton VOR, and then we'll go ahead and take a left and fly all the way to Groton via this little airway right here, the Victor 308. Now, is that good enough? Is it going to get us close enough to the airport? Well, in visual conditions, sure. And in the real world, by the way, if you took off from this airport, you'd probably get clearance direct, which is a little different than we're going to see in the simulator, but that's okay. So let's go ahead and think about how we're going to land now. So if I were to click over here, it gives us Groton, New London, and it gives us all the instrument approaches available. Obviously, there's visual approaches, but since we're doing IFR, we'll be using an instrument approach. We have an ILS, which is going to give us glide slope as well as left and right. This is an awesome option. We have some random navigation routes. These are awesome, but we're not even going to have a GPS in the aircraft we're going to fly today. Then, of course, we have the VOR option, which is really, really cool, but it's a little difficult to use. So what we're going to do is we're going to go with this ILS or localizer runway 5. And it brings up this neat little chart that looks a little bit like this. Now, one thing you'll notice about this chart is if I look here and look here, you could actually see everything overlaid on itself. So this actual ILS approach is made up of multiple waypoints. It has the Pinette waypoint, and it has the IGON, which is simply a DME reading, again, distance measuring equipment. We also notice there's another one that has Mondi intersection. So let's go over here, and actually I'm going to type in Mondi. Uh-oh, look what happened. If we followed this Victor Airway, we'd have to take this insanely sharp left turn and then an insanely sharp right turn in order to line us up with the runway. So this is one of those situations where it's like, do we want to go follow this airway or do we want to try to line up with the ILS? And again, at distances this short, it's just going to be safer to line up with the ILS directly. As a matter of fact, it's so direct, if you were to come down here to the Hampton VOR, they even tell you what angle you need to follow off of, I should say radial, out of Hampton VOR in order to safely intersect the ILS. That's awesome. Let's take advantage of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to delete those two. And now we get this little teeny tiny angle. We're slightly off center from the actual airway. By the way, you're going to notice these small numbers on the airways. Those are just the altitudes we have to be at or above in order to safely intersect any sort of radio signal at those altitudes. So that lines us up really, really well, actually. So let's say here we've got Mondi, we have Pinette, and do we have another one? No, that's basically going to be the 2, and that'll take us in for a landing. So right here is actually right here, and you can actually see the islands, you can actually see the islands. So this is actually a very straightforward flight. We'll simply take off, intersect the Victor 46, cross Hampton, take a left turn, follow the Tree 4 radial up until we hit this point. How do we know we hit this point? That gets a little tricky. Well, the reason we know we hit this point is the fact that we're going to be getting a reading off of this localizer as we track this radial. Now, you're sitting there going, oh, we've got some magic coming. Well, for veterans, again, this would be something you'd already know what to do. We're actually going to use 2 different CDIs to reliably track these so that we don't run into that potentiality. So we're going to come down here, hit this point. We need to be at 1,900 feet or above. That's what this little line simply says. When we get to Pinette intersection, which is going to be right here. After we hit that point, we should have more than enough information from our localizer glide slope. We'll be able to follow this thing all the way down to the ground without even looking out the window this entire flight. Keep in mind, in the real world, IFR flying requires instrument flight plans as well as air traffic control, something we're going to leave out. So what do we need to make this flight successful? Well, first things first, we're probably going to want to make a note of some of the frequencies that we're going to need. All right, so I'm going to create myself a really, really basic checklist here. So frequency, name, note. So the first one we're going to need to know is Hampton VOR. That's going to be, let's see here, 113.6. That's going to be HTO. Note, follow 105 radial, then transfer to 35 radial after crossing. Awesome. All right, now we're also going to need to know the ILS, the localizer frequency, which is located right up here. It's going to be 111.3, that's why we check. That is going to be IGON. This will be our ILS localizer. Approach course is going to be 48. Beautiful. Now, is there any other of these frequencies we're going to need to know for this flight? I highly recommend putting in Groton's frequency as well, just on the freak chance that you lose it. That is 110.85, gone. Groton, DME, VOR. This is good, because if we get horribly lost, we can always just dial this in and basically home in directly into this place. But other than that, our flight plan's looking pretty darn good. We've got the frequencies we need. We have the general path we need. We have a mental picture of what everything looks like. Speaking of mental picture, one thing I highly, highly recommend, again, this website's good for this, take a peek at the airport diagram. And you can actually mentally visualize what it's going to be looking like coming from here all the way down onto the ground. You know, what does this runway look like? Usually what they do is they'll actually tell you to draw this out in your navigation handbook just so that you don't lose this, because this is something you want to have burned into your memory so you don't accidentally land at the wrong airport. All right, we're pretty good. Let's go ahead and take a look at a checklist real quick to make sure we're in great shape. Yep. We've got, AFD, we're going to skip that step because we're working in a simulator. Like I said, it's a good idea to draw them. Notate frequencies, we did that. Highlight course, we did that. VORs are an NF log, we did that. Measure distances, checked. Outlook briefing, I chose the weather. It's coming out of the northeast and it's foggy. Let's see, emergency planning. In this particular case, this flight is so short, our emergency procedure is to go back from which we came. Obviously, you never just do one emergency procedure, you have multiple. So in this case, if the wind was coming out of here, that probably means there's a front going this way. We might actually want to try to escape down to Manitowoc, for example. All right, check that Outlook briefing, make sure everything's good, looks good. 1 hour before, we've computed this in the flight simulator. Pre-flight, very critical, not so much in a simulator where you can click a button. Obtain weather briefing. Again, I made the weather up. This is really important, but you do this online these days. Determine cruising altitude. So what altitude are we going to be traveling at? Well, the reality here is if you see these big amber numbers every once in a while, those are the minimum altitudes you want to be traveling. There's also numbers directly on the airways. In this case, this one says 2,000. This one over here says 1,900. Unless we're at that altitude, we cannot reliably detect our radials/VOR stations to get good navigation data. So in this particular case, I'm feeling like 2,000 feet is going to be more than high enough, except we are traveling eastwards, which means that because of that, we're going to have to be traveling at an odd 1,000. In this case, 3,000 feet is going to be the way to go. Let's see, alternate requirements. Wind correction angle is not going to be an issue here. Calculate true airspeed. Again, I'm going to leave all this stuff out. This is for a much more advanced tutorial in a while. Time between checkpoints. This is so important in the real world. Again, we're going simple here today. Adequate fuel, plenty. Air traffic control services, woo-wee. This could be an hour video. Prepare a flight plan. We're going to do that in a second. Of course, always work out your alternate plans in case something goes bad. Last minute checks. Always check the weather, take off, and we are good to go. This IFR flight plan is looking pretty solid. So how do we bring that directly into Flight Simulator? Well, let's go take a look. Over here in Flight Simulator now, you have your little mapper. If you're in the main menu, by the way, and you click on World Map up here, it brings up this little detail. So in this particular case, I'm going to go ahead and type in my departure airport. And I'm going to go over here and type in my arrival airport. And over on this side, I'm going to go ahead and say my intention is to use an IFR flight using low altitude airways. Hey, would you look at that? It knew basically exactly what we just calculated. And no, I didn't cheat. I just had a feeling that that Victor airway was going to be the default that it would pick. Now, the other thing we could do is we could actually do VOR to VOR as well. And as you noticed, it does this dead line straight to Groton. Why? Because Groton's got its own VOR station. It's like cheating. We could also say high altitude airways. Notice it's direct again, because there actually is an airway above our heads, above the regular low altitude airway. So now we're good as far as this goes. Let's go ahead to our navigation log. Let's go ahead and set our cruise altitude. 3,900 feet is pretty good, but like I said, we chose 3,000. So we're going to be climbing up. We're going to get to Hampton. We'll probably be about 3,000 feet at that point. We'll start descending, let's see, 3 minutes after we get Hampton. So it's not a bad idea to set your stopwatch. This is going to be Boros. Again, they gave us Boros. We're not actually going to fly via Boros. Because like, remember I had that weird little zigzag thing? We don't want to be doing that. And that's going to put us down to the ground nice and safely. Everything's looking great. Let's go ahead and pre-flight our aircraft real quick. Of course, we're going to do this in a slightly smaller aircraft. Yes, the Cessna 152 is a great choice for this. It's going to be a little bit longer of a flight, which I apologize, but it's worth the time because it makes it easier to track radials. Livery looks good. Fuel, we'll make sure we have a nice full tank. Payload, I don't weigh that much. I'm actually weigh a little less than that, but that's all right. I also carry bags and books and stuff with me, so close enough, close enough. Failures are going to be off. This is a whole other discussion. Air traffic control options. Obviously, my tail number is going to be 64. And now we're in great shape. On our next video, we'll actually go ahead and fly this flight, and I'll show you how to twiddle those knobs in order to safely get us to our destination. Enjoy.